Thanks for that, Damien. So good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank Damien, Joanna, and the conference organisers for the opportunity to talk about this project. And I have a wee bit of a sore throat today, so I hope my voice actually holds out till the end. So sorry for any croakiness in advance. Today, I'm going to talk about Annacarty Barracks, the role it played in policing in the 19th century, and in particular about the events that unfurled around and within the structure during the War of Independence and Civil War. I'm also going to talk about the work that was undertaken in 2015 and 2016 into the barracks and the battlefield. Now, these works comprise built heritage survey, metal detection survey, and extensive geophysical surveys with some interesting and unexpected results. Like many archaeological projects, there is a large cast and crew behind the scenes, and I feel I may not be actually the best place to talk about these as I no longer work at the heritage area. So apologies in advance to Heather, Tom, James, who are the real brains and drivers of this project. So the inset image you can see of a squat defensive tower that looks at first glance to be a medieval castle is actually Annacarty Barracks, and I think it is quite the story to tell. Next slide, please, Damien. So the earliest civil police in Tipperary, it relates to the Peace Preservation Force established in 1814 by Robert Peel. And in 1814, 21 peelers, as this constabulary were known, were sent to Tipperary. Now, Annacarty Barracks was constructed around this date, and it makes it one of the oldest surviving constabulary barracks on the island. A detailed discussion of constabulary policing is far beyond the scope of the talk today, but the Irish Constabulary Act of 1822 established a nationwide civil police force. This constabulary was an all-male force and had a military character from its inception. The detachment of constabulary stationed in Annacarty would have been recruited from outside the locality, and there were a lot of controls placed on the police by the force. For example, they were required, they had to get permission to marry. The barracks did have a domestic aspect for the police station there, so you can see the practice of homeworking has been around for a very long time, and you'd wonder how this lads' gaff was organised in terms of its domestic functions. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the front of the barracks. You can see an original iron-studded wooden door survives, an octagonal corner tower, a decorative croix pommée. I had to look this up on the NIAH. It's a cross with rounded apple shapes on the end. You can see the crenellated battlements and the rounded windows. It's a very well-constructed building with fine architectural details, and it had a really imposing character with overtly defensive features. It was very much a statement of power. Next slide, please. So the question that struck me when I first arrived at the site was like, why here? Today, Annacarty is a really peaceful place, but back in the early 19th century, with a large rural population suffering under the structures of landlordism, what was termed agrarian unrest was rampant in the area. Tipperary had a disproportionate allocation of the total constabulary strength, and the reason for the so-called unrest was evictions by the largest local landlord, Hawarden of Dundrum. A document from 1821, you can see a little excerpt from it here. It notes the response of, how shall I put it, the local residence committee, known as Captain Lightfoot's Corps, to the eviction of tenants and the replacement with others likely at higher rents. The actions of these groups, sometimes known as ribbon men, were the reason for so many police in County Tipperary in general, and the construction of the barracks at Annacarty on land gifted by Hawarden. Next slide, please. So you get a sense of like kind of the location and the kind of the general kind of structure from these trio of slides from our drone survey of the barracks. And you can see that it really has commanding views over the countryside, the village, and the crossroads of Annacarty. It was a real statement of dominion and control. But as we will see later, an edifice of authority also makes for a very large target. Next slide, please. The barracks at Annacarty spans the entire period of constabulary policing in Ireland from 1822 to 1922. And a bit of a spoiler alert here, but the barracks was destroyed in 1922, the year the RIC were disbanded. So the fate of the barracks, I think interestingly, mirrors the fate of British constabulary police in this part of Ireland. The whole question of who and what were the RIC is a really interesting one. And I think there's a lot of scope for more research into the material legacy of the RIC. The royal prefix to the Irish Constabulary was awarded to the force for their role in suppressing the Fenian Rebellion of 1867. And I think this gives an insight into why the RIC were armed and structured on military lines. The equipment of the RIC constable you can see in the image on the left, and the soldier in the centre are very similar and distinctly different from the English policeman on the right, who policed by consent. The pump-action shotguns and bayonets that the RIC were issued with also kind of stand out as a significant difference between civic policing on this island and in Britain. During the War of Independence, the IRA noted that the haul of weapons taken from Littleton Barracks, a similar 4 constable barracks, comprised 8 Lee Enfields, 3 to 4,000 rounds of .303 ammo, 7 to 8 Webley revolvers, some egg bombs, not quite sure where they are actually, and some Mills grenades. And even though this is a wartime footing, it shows that the RIC could be tooled up for quite serious action. Next slide, please. So the RIC and the many rural barracks like Annacarty were to play a full role in the War of Independence, particularly in the early part of the war. Many were attacked and destroyed, with the majority of the undefensible barracks were abandoned later in the conflict. The War of Independence was typified by small unit actions using light arms and engagements of short duration. And there's been an issue of how archaeologically visible the battlefields of the period are. And it's been a revelation actually to hear today some of the research that's been undertaken in investigating the Irish Revolutionary period through the lens of archaeology. Our relatively small war has a bigger archaeological footprint than I think many people, including I, realised. Next slide, please. Now, before I get into the strictly archaeological aspects of the research we carried out at Annacarty, I wanted to bring some of the human story to the fore and to talk about some of the people who actually lived in this barracks. You can see the excerpt from the Bureau of Military History here, that the Sergeant O'Sullivan, who was the sergeant at Annacarty, like many other RIC men, he was a Catholic, obviously with very strong nationalist views, as we'll see, and he was providing information to the local IRA unit. After a detachment of Black and Tans was stationed in Annacarty, he actually tried to make arrangements with the IRA to peacefully hand over the barracks, but his offer was rejected by the IRA brigade officer commanding, who stated, "A barracks tapped is better than a barracks taken." And I think this fairly cold decision was to cost O'Sullivan his life, as he was shortly thereafter disappeared by the British forces. Annacarty was to remain under British control until the truce was declared, and it was one of only 2 rural barracks in the county to hold out. And this was likely due to the inherently defensive design of the original building, and possibly from additional entrenchments that were added during the War of Independence. And we've some possible evidence about that we'll see in a while. Next slide, please. On the day of the truce, the local IRA decided to throw a farewell party for the British garrison at Annacarty, and the impact mark of some of these shot that came in on the structure, as we'll see in a minute, they're preserved by the fabric of the barracks. And I think this also paints an interesting scene of the late stages of the War of Independence in Tipperary, with a confident IRA moving freely in the countryside and the British forces effectively pinned down in a strong point. Now, for any of the British forces who had served on the Western Front in the First World War, as we know many of them had, this would have been a very familiar situation. And this kind of come up in discussion on site with the research team. And we wondered if the war experience of the many British troops had led them to dig in at Annacarty. And could we find any evidence for this? Next slide, please. So the Civil War briefly and violently left its mark on the barracks. After a short siege that was anecdotally paused to facilitate a wedding on the Sunday in the local church, the barracks was captured by the anti-treaty IRA. Petrol was brought from Dundrum village and the barracks was burnt out, with the anti-treaty IRA shortly after retreating to the south of the county. Now, the barracks has been unused since this time, and the image shows the current state of the interior. Next slide, please. And then we rocked up in 2015 and 16 and started having a look at the site. Now, the owner of the barracks, Tom Toohey, said to me after I'd carried out some other archaeological work in the area for him, that he had this yoke up the road and would come and have a look at it. So just be careful, archaeologists, when someone invites you up to look at a yoke in a field to have, you never know where it'll lead. So we started looking at it, and I realised very quickly that this was quite a special site with an incredible level of preservation and a story straddling, I think unusually, both the War of Independence and the Civil War. So we secured funding from Tipperary County Council and the Heritage Council to undertake structural and geophysical surveys. And we also carried out, I think, a fantastic public commemorative event called Annacarty Remembers in 2016. And it was a really nice day. We got great buy-in from the local community. I actually had Dan Breen's grandnephew come up and bring some period material up to the site. So all in all, it was kind of a really nice day. And I think it just shows how archaeological investigations are a great, in a way, neutral media to discuss these kind of contentious kind of sites of conflict archaeology. Next slide, please. As you've seen, the barracks today stands proud and alone on top of the small hill, and we didn't really know what to expect from our surveys. Now, the barracks had a lot of bullet impact strike marks visible on the exterior plasterwork from incoming fire, and we wanted to see, could discriminatory metal detection survey identify any additional information around this. We also wanted to see how the barracks site had evolved from 1822 to 1922, and were there any additional structural or other domestic features preserved below ground level. Next slide, please. But the first work we carried out was a structural survey, and this was conducted by Austin Denny, a conservation architect. And this indicated that the exterior plasterwork was in a degrading condition and will likely decay further soon, like it's very prone to weathering. And so the first thing we did was to try and preserve by record these bullet impact strikes that are preserved on the plasterwork. So there's really interesting information regarding the War of Independence and Civil War preserved in the building fabric. We undertook a photogrammetry survey of the exterior, and this preservation by record is now available as a 3D model produced by Earthsound, and it's available online at the link there. Next slide, please. So this slide shows some detail of the bullet strikes marks on a surviving section of the plaster. Now, I had a very kind of helpful conversation with Captain Alan Carney of the Defence Forces, and he provided me with some insight into the weapons of the period. The standard British rifle at the time was a bolt-action rifle that fired a .303 round, and in 1911, the Mark 7 cartridge was introduced. Now, this was a fiendish piece of engineering with a light aluminium front part and a heavier lead antimony base part, and this caused the bullet to spin on impact, causing cavitation in the body, horrific wound channels that led to greater lethality. The joys and dangers of modern metal detection equipment allowed us to calibrate our metal detection devices to pick up the signature of this specific type of bullet. And just a reminder to the general public, I'm sure a lot of people know, but the use of metal detection equipment without a license is not only illegal, but it carries stiff penalties. Next slide, please. So lo and behold, when we carried out our trial metal detection survey of one of the building facades from ground level up to a height of about 2 meters, we found, along with the expected ferrous responses, a number of hits that corresponded to the Mark 7 303 round. Now, there were other hits of lead and tungsten that may also relate to impacted bullets and bullet fragments preserved in the building plaster and mortar. We believe the majority of the hits relate to fragments of bullets that broke up on impact and were spalled and then were caught in the plaster rather than complete bullets. But however, there were a number of hits from the ground in front of the building that may represent more complete bullets. And you can see the areas without surviving plaster, like we think they may have had the highest number of incoming hits and the plaster has been completely blown off. Now, these results are preliminary. They're confined to the lower part of a single elevation, but I think to demonstrate the potential of this technique. And you can see on the image here, the metal hits color coded by metal type. So next slide, please. So this image shows another elevation with bullet strike marks on the surviving plasterwork. And sadly, as I mentioned, like the plasterwork is continuing to degrade. There are currently no plans for any additional conservation works at the site. And I think there's that's a pity, and it's something that I think we should look at sorting out. Next slide, please. So, sorry, bear with me a second. So in terms of investigating the area around the barracks, we literally threw the kitchen sink at it in terms of techniques. And you can see some of the images of the EM, GPR and resistance data here. And there was a lot more than the current surface conditions indicated. We were quite surprised with the extent and the type of the remains. For instance, the top left here, you can see a large stone cairn type structure located to the north. This was evident on the resistance data. Now, Heather will kill me if I'm in any way definitive talking about what we found, but I think you can see from these results that it's a very, very busy site indeed. Next slide, please. Now, one of the aspects of the barracks I alluded to earlier was the potential for the British force of Black and Tans who are garrisoned at Annacarty to have dug in and created entrenchments. There are a number of subsoil cut anomalies that surround the barracks that would be of little recognisable use for a peacetime police station, which would have been very useful in the defence of a military outpost. It is hard to say without breaking ground what some of the subsurface features are, but the subsoil cut trenches around the barrack perimeter hint at something reminiscent of the Western Front. Next slide, please. Again, this slide shows the raw data and a tentative interpretation of the features around the barracks. Now, there's a lot here, and not all of it may relate to the barracks. It's possible that the barracks may not even have been situated in a greenfield site, and there's strong possibility for multi-period remains. The metal detection survey we undertook it was very limited in scope. We did test another area to the southeast of the barracks, and you can see it on the right-hand side of this slide outlined in red, and you can see all of the hits again color-coded by metal type, with the barracks in the top left of that red inset image. Like, these hits also suggest that there are impacted bullets in some quantity on the site, and you might have to press the button a few times, Damien, just to show the location, if you wouldn't mind pressing forward. Yeah, so this is the location of that non-barrack structure metal detection. And one more time, please, Damien. Yeah, thank you. And again, next slide now, please. So overall, the surveys showed a site with many layers. I think it's something of a unicorn site in terms of the Irish Revolutionary period, with multiple actions and engagements in both the War of Independence and civil wars, and with an incredible level of preservation, both in terms of the structural remains, and as you can see from this kind of combined interpretive drawing based on our geophysical survey, it's a very complex site, clearly multi-period. We probably have a lot of prehistoric remains here, but in and around the barrack itself, just to focus in on some of these subsoil cut, 1.5 to 2 meter wide subsoil cut ditches with angular shapes that, surround the barracks itself. These could be interpreted as a type of entrenchment that the Black and Tans created when they moved into the barracks. It was clearly an exposed site, and as we saw from that eyewitness testimony from the Bureau of Military History I had up on the screen earlier, the barracks was, regularly sniped. So it would have been, a sensible precaution, to dig in and enhance the inherently defensive nature of the barracks itself with some external additional fortification. Next slide, please. So overall, I think that this is a site that really deserves further investigation. I feel kind of sad sometimes I don't work in archaeology, so it probably won't be me who picks up the baton and runs with it, but it's certainly hard to think of another site that combines evidence for the material culture of policing and conflict the way that the Annacarty Barracks site does. It's a very important structure architecturally. It's a very important structure in terms of its role both in the Civil War, in terms of the War of Independence, and clearly the level of preservation here is exceptional, unlike a lot of the structures that we've actually seen in the talks earlier today, where there's been a lot of later development, and reconstructing that tangible archaeological footprint can be quite challenging. I think this site presents a very kind of rare opportunity to ground truth some of the really interesting suggestions that the geophysical survey has produced. So next slide, please. So just before I finish up, here's a few more images of the barracks and the surviving architectural details. It's a really extraordinary structure, and if you're ever down in Tipperary, it is worth a trip to Annacarty for a look. Now, just to draw your attention to the centre top image, there are some doubts about the authenticity of the Dan Breen signature, but otherwise, I think this site is, it's legit. It's the real deal. And it's a site that would lend itself very well to excavation and further survey. But as it stands, there are currently no plans to conduct further investigations at the site. Next slide, please. So just some acknowledgements now before I wrap up. You can see here a lorry load of volunteers who would have been very familiar with the Barracks and Battlefield at Tipperary. This was taken just down the road in 1922. And we had our own lorry load of volunteers who kind of, helped with the project to date. Tom Toohey, the landowner, has been just incredible. He wants this site to be, all that it can be, and he's really kind of opened it up to research. So I think that should be commended. Marcella, Joanne, Will, all the guys who helped with the fieldwork, Heather, the gang at Earthsound, and everybody else that's listed there. So that's it for me. Thanks for listening, everyone.